Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of our Thrive in China Roundtable. It is lovely to have you all back and welcome. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our Thrive in China Roundtable, allow me to give you a little bit of a background. We offer knowledge, experience, as well as the latest trends and updates in the Chinese and Hong Kong market. And we offer this sharing of knowledge every Wednesday at 1 p.m. through a variety of different topics related to company administration in both China and in Hong Kong. Today, we're going to be looking at location choice in China specifically and what are the legal and tax ramifications of that. Before we start today's presentation, though, allow me to introduce you to who we are. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is one of China and Hong Kong's leading and trusted business setup and corporate administration firms. We specialize in helping foreign investors with their market entry as well as their growth and scaling in both the Chinese and Hong Kong market. Our role is to eliminate all of the complexities surrounding corporate administration in China, everything from accounting regulations, tax compliance, audit, internal audit, health checks, payroll, HR administration, HR compliance, all of these types of aspects that need to be thought about in both markets. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm a leading expert on inbound investment, specifically into the Chinese market. My brother, who is our managing director, is specialized on inbound investment into Hong Kong. I personally have helped over 750 companies with their expansion into the Chinese territory, assisting them with all of the investment advisory and corporate compliance administration requirements that are needed, as well as advising them on growth and scale in the Chinese market. So the topic for today that we're going to be touching on is location choice in China. And for me, this topic is a relatively big deal because foreign investors don't take it seriously. They assume that this is a very minor point that can be fixed later on. In fact, this is a huge point that can affect your budget if you don't get it right from the beginning. Now, selecting the right location in China, it does require careful evaluation, not only for the specifics of your business strategy on where you should be in China, but also in terms of legal aspects, tax aspects, regulatory compliance, and then ultimately also the operational factors. So please make sure when you are thinking about location choice in China, talk to the right advisors, talk to real estate agents who have the expertise on understanding where it might be that you best locate. Talk to legal advisors, tax advisors on what might be the pros and cons of locating in certain areas. Today, I want to offer you a very brief introduction on 10 points that I think are critical for you to analyze and do an analytical comparison on in relation to choosing your location. The first one is the legal structure, right? Before coming into China, you've got to understand what your business scope is going to look like, what are the activities you're going to be performing in China, and what are the right structures for that. You also then have to understand, how does this impact the location you're going to be in? If you are setting up a joint venture, does that mean that the location needs to be with the partner? If you are trying to get government subsidies from a specific district or city in China, does that mean you have to locate your legal structure there? And are they going to then dictate what type of structure you need? At the same time, evaluate tax considerations. There are preferential policies that are throughout China. And the downside to these preferential policies is that they are not forever. These are policies that are there for a limited period of time to attract foreign investment. And ultimately, it's a matter of understanding how long you can benefit from these preferential treatments. When are you going to be tax impacted by it, right? So doing careful tax planning and optimization is critical. Then understand the regional differences, right? When you look at regional differences, it's understanding kind of the operational aspects of your business, from skilled laborers, labor availability, property availability. What does the infrastructure look like? Is infrastructure important for you? It's government support. Are there any government support programs that are being offered? It's analyzing what these various differences might actually be. Government regulations is also critical. Now, when a government policy has been announced, it is announced from Beijing. It is then filtered through to the tier 1 cities, who then filter it through to the tier 2 cities, who then filter it through to the tier 3, tier 4 cities. As you filter these government policies down, there are certain nuances or perhaps certain twists that will occur by different cities and different districts. It's a matter of understanding what those nuances might be when you are looking at the government regulations. IP is critical. If you have a lot of brand assets that you're looking to protect, you might want to be near one of the IP courts that has been set up to do this type of protection. So understanding what is available in your neighborhood is also important. Labor laws and employment practices. Again, one of the critical issues around this is social insurance. You can only pay, well, that's not true. You can pay social insurance from the place where you're incorporating your entity. However, your candidature of new employees might not be willing to take on that social insurance. They might want to have that social insurance based on where they live. So understand these nuances are also regarding how you're going to find people, how you're going to employ them, and how does the social insurance and housing fund benefits actually help. Access to markets and supply chains is also critical, right? And this comes together with infrastructure. Do you need to be near your suppliers? Do you need to be near your customers or your distribution points? Do you need to be near your warehousing? Do you need to be near your marketing agencies? Where do you need to be in order to make sure that your business is efficient, right? We want to create an efficient structure. You have to analyze your access to your supply chain and to the ecosystem that you are collaborating with, making sure that you're not too far away from them. And then obviously think about cultural and language considerations. And by this, I'm really referring to communication. You are going to find candidates who speak better English in the higher tier cities than potentially in the lower tier cities. You might find that odd needle in a haystack who is multilingual, but it might be a little bit more difficult to do that. The bigger cities are more westernized, obviously, compared to the tier 3, tier 4 cities, where there is quite a cultural gap. So understanding the cultural and language considerations around the location you're going to be choosing is also vital. So today I really do want to spend a little bit more time on the legal and tax considerations and how this may impact you. So obviously, when choosing a location in China, there are going to be legal considerations that you have to take in mind. Like I said earlier, one is around corporate structure and registration, understanding what are the local requirements, criteria to set up your entities and then set up your structures. You might also want to look at timeline, efficiency on the incorporation process. Although incorporation is just a one-off step, ultimately you want to see how the government is operating in a long-term process. Ownership restrictions is really looking at the fact that there may be restrictions on foreign ownership in certain industries and in certain sectors, like telecommunications, like finance, like energy. And obviously you need to understand in certain locales how this may impact your business. Obtaining the necessary licenses and permits to actually do your operations may also vary from a national perspective, a provincial perspective, and a municipality perspective. So you have to think about these aspects when looking at the legal aspects. Intellectual property protection is something I talk about nonstop. It is vital to make sure that you are working with the appropriate authorities in the locality that you're in to make sure that you set up strategies to prevent infringement and to safeguard your brand assets. So make sure that this is available to you where you are planning to locate. Contractual agreements is another aspect. Where do you feel like your dispute resolution mechanisms are going to come into play? Just from I'm not a lawyer by any shape or form, but just from my 20 years of experience, going into dispute resolution in a place like Shanghai, I definitely feel more comfortable just because the mediators, the courts are more familiar working with foreign invested companies than, for example, going into tier 3, tier 4 cities where they're pretty clueless and they do things very differently. So understand from a contractual aspect, where is the arbitration committee? Is it in Shanghai? Is it in Beijing? Where, if there is a dispute that's going to occur, which court are you going to go to in China to be able to assist you? And generally, it's going to be in the place where you are registered. Like I said earlier, labor and employment laws will have slight nuances from city to city. It's really important to understand what are the salary guidelines in that city, what are the working hour guidelines in that city, what are social insurance and workplace safety guidelines also in that city, because there may be these nuances that are there. Taxation and financial reporting. Again, you're going to have the general laws coming down from Beijing, but again, there might be nuances in the different cities, even in the different districts. Understanding what your tax officer from his tax bureau's deadlines are for financial reporting will be vital. And understanding, again, these little nuances will be critical. Staying informed about regulatory changes and updates affecting not only your industry and your sector, but also your general business operations for the place where you're locating in is important. Getting up to date on safety protocols, environmental regulations, data privacy, and the nuances and all of that regarding to where you're basing your company is critical. Dispute resolution mechanisms I touched on in terms of contractual agreements. In your contracts, you're going to state where your place of arbitration is going to be. If you choose China as your place of arbitration, generally you're going to choose the place where you're registered to act as that place of arbitration. Understand resolution methodologies, understand how to resolve disputes, what are the experiences of the government and the courts if you're going to be doing that. Government relations and compliance. For me, this is really critical, especially if you're taking advantage of tax incentives that are being offered on a provincial, municipal, even district level. It's maintaining those relationships to understand how you can benefit from these incentives, these schemes, and to be continuously updated on what the latest policies are that you can take advantage of. Maintaining those relationships in your locale are critical. Now, practical tips from a legal perspective is also what I want to offer you. We'll wait for the slide to change. Apologies, it's taking a bit of time. There we go. So when you register your company in China, you have to specify a registered office address. Now, in reality, your registered office address must also be your operational office. It should not be a virtual office location. It should be where you do have the intention to have your employees be based. There are too many people who choose a virtual office location, then choose another place for operational, and it gets so confusing. And then when there are government visits, all hell can break loose. So make sure that you realize when you register a company in China, you must have a registered office address, and it must be your operational office, because this is where all government bureaus are informed that this is your office, and that when they come and visit, without making an appointment, there's somebody there to greet them. Virtual office addresses are considered to be illegal in China, and should be not used. However, I don't think that's a realistic point of view to have. There are a lot of companies out there, a lot of foreign investors out there who need to have an office space in China. And and just need an office space. They don't plan on actually having any employees. So business centers have offered the solution of actually providing registered office address only solutions where you'll have a proper office space, but you're not planning on housing anybody there. The advantage of a business center is the fact that they do have a receptionist, so they can greet government people that come in. They can also take your packages, take phone calls, and all of this stuff. There are also law firms out there who offer their office spaces as virtual office addresses. This is legal that the law firms can do this. However, it is only supposed to be a temporary solution for the incorporation phase. At some point, you are supposed to move into a real office space. I have had clients who have forgotten to do that. And as a consequence, actions such as bank accounts being frozen or things like that can halt your business. For example, your tax officer not appreciating that you don't have a real office space and therefore not allowing you to issue FAPIAs anymore. These are all things that can happen if you don't have a proper registered office address. Now, when you are registering your company in China, you do need to sign a minimum of a 1-year lease agreement. Anything shorter will be denied in the incorporation phase. Even if a law firm is offering you their space as a registered office address, you do have to sign a lease agreement, even if the rent is 0. There are also promotion bureaus of various zones and districts that are trying to promote foreign investment into them. We know of one international hub in Putuo district in Shanghai that is offering incentives for foreign investors to go there. You can rent an virtual office space. It is through the Government Promotions Bureau. You are signing a lease with the Putuo district government, and you are signing a minimum of a 1-year lease agreement to have 0 rent. You also need to remember that based on the business scope that you've chosen for your company, it needs to match the type of property that you're going to be choosing. If in your business scope you are doing commercial trading, then a commercial office building will suffice. If you plan on saying that you're doing assembly, warehousing, simple assembly and labeling, then they might expect you to have a bigger space, potentially in a warehousing facility. If you're saying you're manufacturing, it needs to be in a manufacturing space. If you say that you're going to be doing retail, you need to have a lease agreement of a retail shop. So the type of property has to match the business scope that you're indicating, okay? And the lease agreement will need to match with that as well, all right? The other key thing to remember is that, and I want to highlight on that point, that residential properties do not count. So you cannot set up an entity at a residential space. Now, the key thing to remember is that unlike other jurisdictions, you can only register one company in one registered office space. This is unlike other jurisdictions. So in Hong Kong, for example, nearly all of our clients use Woodburn's office as their registered office address. We have a couple of 100 companies registered there. It's an unlimited amount. In China, only one. And the reason why is that each space is then registered with the real estate bureau, and there is a track record of who is in that property. Therefore, when you sign a lease agreement, make sure that the previous tenant is no longer mentioned with the real estate bureau, as this can delay your incorporation phase. But also be reminded that there's a specific space for you where you are registered. Now, the downside, as you are starting your journey, your company is registered and you're operational, is what happens if you decide that actually you registered in Shanghai, it is not the right place for you to be. You should have registered in Beijing. What do you do? Now, unfortunately, when you register your company in China, you are registering in that city where you have chosen. And you can't just pick up that company and now move it somewhere else. It is a new application. Or you set up a branch office, which is an extension of that original office in the other location. Either you maintain it, set up a branch, or you close it down and you set up new in that new city. This is why location is so vital, because there are too many foreign investors out there who change their minds later on and don't realize how this is going to impact them administratively. Because their philosophy is, well, like in Europe, we can just pick it up, and move it to another province, another area of the country. It doesn't work like that. And this is where the legal considerations really play a role. So understand and doing your homework on what is the right location for you is vital. A lot of foreign investors don't know that real estate agents can all actually do location studies to analyze from an operational perspective what would be the best city for you. So I really recommend that people take up these real estate agents' offer on doing these studies, that it gives you a little bit more insight and benchmarking on where would be the right location for you, so you can avoid any of these dilemmas at a later stage. So the next point I want to look at is tax considerations. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of tax considerations you have to think about: corporate income tax, value-added tax, withholding tax, customs duty, individual income tax. You have to think about transfer pricing regulations. What are certain tax incentives and preferential policies that are being offered? Then you also have to think about just the day-to-day work around taxes, which is the tax reporting and compliance. Do we apply for tax treaties? And then obviously the point that many companies don't do is really the tax planning and the tax optimization. All of this homework leads me into 3 critical points about the tax considerations in China. The first point I want to highlight, and I do want to use this map of Shanghai, and I hope it's not fuzzy, but I do want to use this as an example. In Shanghai, there are over 15, 16 districts. When you are registering your company in China, you are registering that company in that city, so Shanghai as an example. And then based on your registered office address location, you are registering with the tax bureau of that location in that district. So if we are in K11 in Shanghai, which is in Huangpu district, our company is registered in Shanghai. Our tax bureau, because our registered office address is in K11, is the Huangpu Tax Bureau. Okay. Now, this is important because when you look at this map of districts, you can be assured that in the central business CBD area of Shanghai, those yellow points from 1 to 8, you can be assured that there are quite a lot of foreign investors that are located there. You can also be assured then that the tax bureaus in those districts are quite familiar with working with foreign invested companies and abiding by the foreign investment regulations. Now, I don't know if you can see it properly on the screen, but in the south, there is Fengshan district. And I've got a couple of foreign investors that have located their businesses there, whether it was for cheaper rent, whatever it might be, but a lot of them have registered their businesses there and actually have operational offices then in the downtown. Now, the downside to this is, one, your operational office is then not in Fengshan, which for both my clients, the government is fully aware of and has given warnings. 2, Fengshan tax bureaus, the tax officers themselves are really not familiar with foreign investment policies around e-commerce, around just general import-export, around manufacturing, because there are not a lot of foreign investors that are located there. And this makes it very difficult to have negotiations or to apply for incentives that might be applicable to you, because they don't have this familiarity on your type of structures. So these are the type of location analyses that you need to make and to understand when it comes to tax considerations. In addition to that, the second point, tax incentives may be offered by the state, by local, or by district governments. And what I want to highlight here is that they do not last forever. Okay, so if I show you this, if you look at number 5 in the screen, that is Putuo district. And as I said, in the little corner of Putuo district, there is now this international talent hub, which is a new zone. It has actually its own Putuo Government Promotions Bureau promoting it, asking for foreign investment to go in there. They are offering virtual office schemes. They're actually have beautiful office spaces and type of business center locations. And in addition to that, in this hub, they have negotiated with the Putois Tax Bureau to offer tax incentives in the form of tax rebates. So when you are paying your profits tax of 25%, your VAT of 6% for services, 13% on goods, also your individual income tax. If you are profitable, you can apply for VAT rebates, income tax rebates, as well as individual income tax rebates for your employees. This is an application that happens at the year end, where you analyze all the taxes that you have paid and whether you fall under a certain level of profitability, in which case then you get the rebates from the Putois District Tax Bureau and government. Okay, this is not a Shanghai statewide policy. This is purely for Putois. One zone that is not highlighted here is Lianggang, which is a new and upcoming zone. And we have a client now who has applied for a 3-in-1 incentive package where they are also obtaining rebates on their tax liabilities. And just to give you an example, because this is fresh in my head, for 2023, they have it has already been confirmed that they will receive the equivalent of 90,000 renminbi in tax rebates, split between income tax, VAT, and individual income tax. Great incentive. But what I want to highlight here is that as soon as this hub in Putois gets filled up by foreign investors or even Chinese companies, these rebates will probably disappear. In Lianggang, most likely these rebates will also disappear. And I know this because more and more often now, there are older zones that were created 5 to 10 years ago that were offering these tax incentives. And I'll give you the example of Qianhai in Shenzhen, where they were offering a 15% income tax rate for all companies registered there. This is now going to end as of the 31st of December, 2025. Which means that from 1st of January 2026, all companies in Qianhai will be taxed at the normal rates of 25%. Okay, so I want people to realize that these tax incentives are not forever. In addition to that, if these zones are also offering rental-free periods, right, that's not forever. At some point, you will be paying rent just because they want to earn this rental income. So when you are doing your tax planning and your tax optimization, please keep that in mind when you're calculating then the tax incentives that are being offered, because again, it is not a full-time deal. Now, when it comes, and I'll show you again on this map, the third thing that I want to highlight is if you move districts. So we were talking earlier about the legal consequences of changing cities, right? Now I want to talk just very simply about changing districts. As I mentioned earlier, you are registering your company in the city of Shanghai. You have decided to register in Jiading district. And now you've said, you know what? I don't want to be in Jiading. It's really a long driving distance for my staff to get to work. I actually now want to move to Putois district. The issue here is that you have to do a tax closure audit with the Jiading Tax Bureau to then be able to reopen at the Putois Tax Bureau if you move to Putois, okay? This tax closure audit can last anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how quick your current tax bureau or tax officer is to doing this tax closure audit. Reopening in a new tax district is not an issue. It's the closure that is actually the problem. The problem here is that each of these tax districts is in competition one with the other to earn more tax revenue, kind of a little game that they're playing. There's a total tax revenue level that you have to achieve for Shanghai. Each district has their own targets that they have to achieve. And obviously they're not looking to lose clients who are relocating to then their competitors, which are the other districts. And so they are going to try and do a tax closure audit to make sure that there are no further tax liabilities. But also they may slow down the process so that you keep moving into the new tax month, to retain you. So this is where the difficulties can lie in this aspect. I did want to highlight in Channing, I just put this up here because it was in my previous presentation. The Australia House is based in Channing District in Shanghai. They also offer tax benefits for companies that are registered at the Australia House as their registered office address. And they are offering preferential tax rebates for companies that are located there. So if you can see on the table here, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, when you look at the tax payable, so basically you're looking at your net profit. If your net profit is between 0 and 5 million renminbi, you get a 50% refund on VAT. You get a 50% refund on your corporate income tax. And on the total individual income tax paid, you get also a 30% refund. So these are nice, attractive benefits that are still being offered. For how long, though, I can't tell you. So that'll be interesting to see. So this all comes down to the fact that I started off the intro with 10 points for you to analyze. Tax is one of those components. Legal aspects is another component. There are 8 other components you need to look at, okay? Doing a comparative analysis also by areas in China may be helpful. And so I just wanted to show you what a real estate agent would do in a location study. If you look at costs of doing business, I mean, it's clear to everybody, tier 1 cities are more expensive in terms of operating costs, whether you're looking at real estate prices, salaries, utilities, taxi cabs. I mean, just general things are more expensive if you are looking at the tier 1 cities than if you're looking at the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So obviously thinking about cost savings, you may want to go into the tier 2, tier 3 cities. Market access. We know that the purchasing power, the biggest level of purchasing power for consumers is in the tier 1 cities. In the tier 2, tier 3 cities, although there is a rapid increase, it is not as far as the tier 1. But if you want to beat out your competitors, that's where you might be staying. Infrastructure and logistics. Obviously, the tier 1 cities are more mature, more well-developed compared to the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Although I will say that I have been to some of those airports in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and they are much more well-developed than some of those in Europe. But still, compared to the tier 1, they might not be great. So again, from an infrastructure and logistical perspective, connectivity is key. Do you have that connectivity capability? Government support and incentives. The tier 1 cities are still offering incentives. I think it's a matter of knowing where to look and who you are connected to. Tier 2 and tier 3 cities are trying to attract more foreign investors, so they will generally have more government support and incentives, but usually these are through grants and subsidies that you have to apply for. And that's, again, never a guarantee that you win these grants or that you win these subsidies. Industry ecosystem, again, the tier 1 cities tend to have clusters of industries and sectors where you can feed off of each other, right? Get information, get value add, etc. When you go in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, there are emerging clusters coming, but it is not as mature and diverse as they are in the tier 1 cities. So if you find in your specific niche that there are these clusters, I'll give you an example. I had a client in the medical device sector, and I completely have forgotten now because it was 5-6 years ago. They specifically went into a medical device cluster was created, I believe, through AstraZeneca. I want to say in Nanjing, but please don't take my word for it. And AstraZeneca were creating from the plans, it almost looked like a university of laboratories, research facilities, where medical device companies could go there, set up their companies, and they would get certain preferential policies. So these types of industry ecosystems where you can feed off of each other is, again, invaluable. Talent pool, I think, is critical. I've pivoted my business from a perspective that I want to spend less on training new graduates. I want to hire people that are mature, well skilled, flexible, and usually this happens when you're older, and therefore I'm looking at more professional level individuals. I tend to only find these people in tier one cities. So I think it's really important to evaluate, what are you looking from a labor pool? What are you looking for in terms of a skill set? And where are you going to find these people? Okay. Obviously, tier one cities are also going to be more expensive than the tier two, tier three cities. Regulatory environment, again, is critical. I find the tier one cities have definitely matured. They are, when a policy comes out from Beijing, it is transparent and clear about what's going to be happening in these tier one cities. I feel there's a lack of transparency and clarity from the tier two, tier three cities, and there are more nuances that you have to be aware of. Just my personal opinion. So I think that's something to take into account. Risk factors. I think it's, again, very clear to see that tier one cities have higher levels of competition. There is regulatory scrutiny. There's market saturation. In tier two and tier three cities, there are lower levels of market risk. But, again, it's always going to be pros and cons. The challenges will be infrastructure, labor pool, supply chain reliability, etc. So then it comes to strategic decision making. How are you going to actually decide? And I wanted to list out here 10 points of how to make that decision. And this is kind of, I guess, then your action plan and your homework for choosing the right location. One is market analysis. Okay, we all know market research is vital. Okay, it's identifying where your target markets are in China. Where are your competitors in all of this? Where are they located? And where's the possible growth potential, right? Then it's looking at the labor market, costs, availability. Cultural and social factors for me are critical as a Westerner. If you are planning on hiring foreigners or seconding expatriates, do they want to live in the tier three, tier four cities? I know I wouldn't. I would prefer, I started off in Shanghai. My love is for Shanghai. I would not move from Shanghai. That is the place to be in my mind. But I have to evaluate with a family, what is the quality of life I'm going to get? So again, think about your company, your company philosophy, your ethos. What do you want to portray as an image? And whether that city fits your cultural and social factors. Regulatory environment, again, critical. What are investment incentives, tax incentives, and what is the framework? Tax considerations, what are the rebates, tax rates, customs duties? Are you also in a specific industry or sector like clean tech where you might get preferential treatments, and that would be then throughout China? But does your tax district bureau know of those incentives is another thing. Access to suppliers and customers, again, is very critical. Supply chain, customer base, all of that needs to be identified. Infrastructure and logistics. I think a key thing here is make sure you visit the warehousers. If you're outsourcing logistics, visit them, understand where your products are going to be located. Do they require special benefits? Are they going to offer you these special benefits? Risk assessment, again, very important in terms of political stability, environmental risks. The last two for me are key. When most foreign investors come to me and they say, I just need a registered office address, and you can tell they're only thinking about short term. They're not analyzing on the long term. They're not analyzing on being strategic about their location. I always try to promote and encourage them to think about scalability and flexibility. Is this location viable for you for the long term? Does this location give you flexibility to pivot and adapt where and if needed? And then obviously think about your strategic alignment and how you plan on growing and scaling. Does this location align with the business strategy that you have in place? Are there any risks or trade-offs that you have to take in mind? Those last 2 points for me are really the biggest key aspects to think about when you are choosing your location. So that is the end for today's presentation. I hope you guys all found this useful. If you are ready to get started and you're looking to expand into China and you want to have a conversation with us about location and what might be your tax and legal ramifications, in the email I'll send out to you with the link to the recording, I'll provide you with a link to my diary where you can schedule a call. If you are in a stage where you're thinking of pivoting and moving and you need to be in multiple locations, again, talk to us. We'd be happy to advise you on what would be the best for you strategically to do. If you would like to join our Thrive in China community on WeChat, please scan in my QR code, connect with me on WeChat. It's always wonderful to expand our networks, and I will allow you to join our community where we are sharing insights into doing business in China. Last but not least, next week we're going to be talking about fapiaos, e-fapiaos, all the practical changes that have been occurring in the last 12 months. We'll then take a 2-week Easter break, and then on the 17th of April, we will start again with the third term of this year, if you like, of our roundtable sessions. No questions have popped in thus far, so I assume everything's been clear. But again, if you would prefer to have a one-to-one conversation, we can absolutely do that. Happy to do that. I want to thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care and goodbye.